Welcome back to our next episode of Free Lunch, a show where we talk about everything going on in the economy and specifically the comments, the weekly highlights, and things that our fans have told us in previous podcasts. Today, I am joined by the one and only Mr. Ken Gishinga.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again for another episode of Free Lunch. We are looking forward to having a very interesting discussion on what has been theme of this week around the World Youth Skills Day. This is the fourth year that we are marking the World Youth Skills Day. Kim, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that phrase?
Really, honestly, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that I'm no longer a youth, and I left that age bracket a while back. But I think it's actually very interesting because of a number of reasons. So one, if we take a definition of the youth between 18 to 35, at least within the Kenyan education system context, those will be people who have just left high school, looking to either get into university or get into a TVET program or go off and become an apprentice somewhere and learn a skill through apprenticeship. So it really is at the heart of sort of the nation's employment force. But then, on the other side of this is the fact that Kenya and Africa's and the developing world's population bulge is at the youth segment. And that's also where there's a high rampant unemployment. So I think all these things sort of come running into my mind. The fact that we are mainly a young nation, but also a fairly lowly employed and engaged nation. So then the issue of skills, just becomes one of those things that we think about a little bit more and think about how do we actually what skills do the youth have when they're coming out of high school, and what gaps can we close? For Ken, what comes to mind when you think about Youth Skills Day?
I completely resonate with you. When I think about the 844 system of education, there is a feeling, I think one of the strengths is it gives a very strong work ethic to students, a work ethic that helps them for life. But I think one of maybe the shortcomings that people frequently talk about is that it does not have access to uh, practical skills that might easily guide people into employment. And I love you talked about unemployment because that's one area that's becoming a very big concern here in Kenya. And it's something that can easily become a demographic bomb if we don't think about. So I think it's really thinking about how do we equip skills? And Kim, you went through both the Kenyan system and the American system,
Yeah,
and how what was your reflection as a student in college?
very interesting. I guess when I think about, even if we talk about college, when I think about coming out of the 844 system and some of the strengths of the system, I resonate with you that it taught us a wide breadth of abilities. So I do remember in high school and even primary school or elementary school, we were taught or given skills around how to farm or how to crochet or how to make desks or tables or joints, agriculture, how to farm, how to take care of livestock. So there's a lot of hands-on application. Now thereafter, the 844 system was changed and it's no longer quite the same. So I think in terms of a skills impartation of the curriculum as it exists, I think it's slightly weaker than it was before. And then when we got into college, it was, at least for me, there was a distinct deviation towards a bit more of specialty focus. It began to become clear in my mind that I needed to be pretty clear on the track that I wanted to follow. And also then pretty quickly realized that if I was trying to enter, for example, a medicine track, I was a bit behind because most people had either taken advanced placement courses in high school, so I wouldn't necessarily be teeing up exactly for that particular sort of course in the American system. So it was quite interesting that, yes, in spite of the shift in systems, it was very interesting to see how, whereas in our normal system here, there's a bit more of a broader view. Like you can go in and study one thing, come out and actually work on something very different, and maybe that's because of the employment opportunities. I did though get a stronger sense that in the US, especially for specific university type degrees or specific career paths, you did get a leg up in high school, which would have been great to have if I wanted to pursue certain specialized courses. Ken, you were lucky enough to go to an Ivy League school. What was the experience for you like?
Well, for me, I think it was an introduction into what is called the liberal arts curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a contrast to what would be called the mechanical arts.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, a fascinating approach to education that really valued breadth,
Mm-hmm.
really valued, even subjects such as accounting. You could not get even courses such like accounting. You could not get them there. It was the histories, the philosophies, and I think it's great, and I think it exposes you to a great field of inquiry. That said, I feel, and I think that's a sentiment that's also being felt here in Kenya, that the place of the mechanical arts, the vocational skills, I think they also have a place in the curriculum. And a lot of people feel, had they been equipped with one of those skills, maybe they would not be unemployed. So I think it's a question of how does a society balance between the great liberal arts, but also make sure people have these tangible vocational skills that in the event they don't get maybe their dream career, they could always have it as a fallback plan. And I think that balance is a very tough thing for any government to apply.
Correct. And, just before we move off this topic of the systems, I know, Ken, you had a chance to talk to different people on the street today on how the education system is, how they perceive World Skills Day, what they think about the youth and the ability to acquire skills that will help them through their career. Perhaps it might be a good point now to listen to some of the feedback that you managed to gather, and then we can regroup on this idea of education. What do you think?
Great.
All right, we shall be right back. Take a listen to this.
My name is Naomi, and I am a teacher by profession. I have been a tutor for the last 12 years. I run some tuition centers in Karen and Kilimani. And today, as we celebrate World Youth Skills Day, I thought I would talk about one or two things that I have had an experience through teaching or educating students. And the main question to ask here is, how skilled are our youth? And number one, the first experience, or a majority of the times when I encounter students, the main challenge that most of them have is that they lack reasoning skills, critical thinking skills. And I usually wonder why that is happening, because it does seem that the education system has failed students, and that is now what we get to see when now we encounter the youth. As we have seen now with coronavirus, necessity is the mother of invention. We have recently heard of the young boy, since now school is closed, from I think Western or Nyanza, has now come up with a wooden bicycle. It may be something to laugh about because it's a wooden bicycle and it's not what we are used to seeing. However, the young man is still able to ferry people from his village to town and actually get some money out of it. We have recently also heard of stories of the Juakali people who have been making beds, hospital beds, and asking the government to buy the hospital beds from them rather than ship them. And also the young man also who makes the chair table um, uh, the chair table thing. And what that actually shows us is that necessity is actually the mother of invention. These are a few people who, and when I see the journalist uh, putting this on the screen for people to see, I don't think they're doing it for entertainment. They are actually sending a message to Kenyans, and showing that we cannot just sit, or the youth cannot sit and wait for the government or wait for their employer to make their ends meet. And it is about looking for a need that you notice that the society lacks in. In this case, we can see for the guy who's doing the hospital beds, so that there was an opportunity here. There is a virus that's spreading throughout the world, and he will benefit from it if the government or the county governments buy the beds from him. And or sometimes youth are encouraged to look for a need that they themselves encounter. For example, the young man, the student who has come up with a wooden bicycle, and it was just because from where the village is and the town is, it's quite a distance, and he saw that he could actually get some form of transportation for himself. And through that, he actually realized other people will need his service. So most of the time, you'll always find that when a need is identified, it will be most likely trying to solve a challenge or a problem that you yourself are encountering, only for you to later realize that you're not the only one who's encountering the same, and that the society or the community still needs your service or your good. So when we look at the skills that are required, for these people and many more who have not been featured, who we do not know their stories, creativity is a must. And uh, like I mentioned earlier on, the education system has failed them, and I do believe that right now, as students are not going to school, it is actually the greatest opportunity for parents and teachers to build the reasoning skills, the critical thinking skills of the students, because it is from this that students will now be able to develop skills to see that they really do not have to depend either on their employer or the government to make their ends meet. And when I now look at the skill on resilience, how resilient are our youth? I honestly do think that our Kenyan youth are resilient. The only challenge is that they lack creativity. And in that case, most of our youth think linearly. They do not think broadly. And that's why, for example, we have seen people, somebody starts a shop to sell a particular unique good, and maybe a month later you have 10, 20 people around the same person doing the same thing. So I do know that a majority of youth are able, they have got the muscle to bounce back. But what prevents them is that creativity. So my call to everyone is that we do have the opportunity, and COVID-19 has really forced us into a very uncomfortable situation whereby we have to reset our thinking and learn either a new skill, and or find out what is it that you yourself are not comfortable with, or that a particular challenge that you'd want solved, and through that you'll actually find that you're solving a challenge for many other people. Thank you.
All right, Ken, what did you think? Very passionate thoughts and sentiments there.
Extremely passionate, and you could tell that's a career educationist speaking right there. I
Mm,
loved what she said about critical thinking. And for me, that I think is something, it doesn't matter what educational background you go through. I think the idea of critical thinking, and I think the question of how well are we positioned for critical thinking in solving problems that maybe didn't come up in our textbooks 5, 10, 15 years ago. How
yeah.
do we solve this kind of problems? I think that idea is what really stuck for me. How about you?
You know, she mentioned such interesting points. The first one that I agree with you as well is this idea of critical reasoning. And I think it reminds me of SAT and TOEFL days where you had to think about things like egg is to chicken as, man is to dash, 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 dash. And you have to sort of try and figure out how an egg and a chicken and a man are related. So I feel like this critical reasoning piece, really does need to be unpacked because I feel like it's a bit of a catch-all for very many different things. One, of course, there's numeracy, there's literacy, there's an ability to formulate a thought and clearly articulate it. There's also this piece, and in the media recently, they showed how your average final year student from elementary school can't even complete a very basic task. So there are some humongous gaps in terms of being able to build learners' confidence around problem solving. I think that's
Mhm.
where the critical reasoning gap comes. And then she mentioned something that was really, really, really powerful on the education system has failed the youth. And when I
Mhm.
thought about that, I began to wonder, is it fair to say that it failed? Or is it more fair to say it delivered an outcome which may not necessarily have been the impact that we were looking for? You know, is it that it actually hasn't failed, but it has solved the problem it was meant to solve, but not the real problem that it should have been solving in the first place? Because when you think about when this system was designed, it was designed to solve and provide people to come and work in new independent Kenya, right? So it was really designed to either get people into jobs or help them be able to stand on their own 2 feet. But I don't know if it helped them to ask the types of questions or to prepare them to ask the types of questions. And this is not even an elementary level, this is beyond. Did it prepare them to ask the types of questions to help them to grow through their careers? Did it cause them to be curious? Did it help them to inculcate a thirst for knowledge? Did it give them the tools that they need in the future to be a continuous learner, an adapter, an innovator? And I think that's the piece maybe that the liberal arts background gave. But I'm curious for your perspectives, Ken.
Wow, you've asked such a profound question there, which really got me thinking to the founding father and his speech on Independence Day
Mm,
and what the goals for Kenya would be at that time. This
mm,
was around removing illiteracy,
mm-hmm,
solving the issue of poverty, disease, and as I said, illiteracy. And you really think about it, it's been more than half a century since that speech.
yeah,
And yet, still the issue of poverty is there.
yeah,
Disease still cripples a lot of people. And I think on the literacy part, we've done quite well. In
yeah,
fact, I think Kenya is considered to be possibly one of the leading countries in Africa
yeah.
when it comes to literacy. So I think some of the successes has been things like such as literacy. I think Kenya does very well, but in terms of converting that literacy into creative ideas of solving for poverty, unemployment, all these things, I think that is where we got lost.
Yeah.
And I don't think we found a solution there because these things do need levels of creativity because you solve poverty through entrepreneurship, through innovation. But if you really even think about how we used to write composition or its equivalent ancient Kiswahili, you'd get points for how many proverbs you've used, how many similes you've used, how many difficult words you've used.
Correct.
And I don't know about you, and because I know a lot of Kenyans who go to American colleges and they try to rehash that in the essay writing in college, and it's always a failure.
Correct.
Because nobody really cares how many proverbs you used or how many similes you use. People want to understand whether you have a thesis,
yes,
and whether you can support a thesis. So
correct.
I think the 844 does very well in things such as literacy, learning the books, learning words, and learning things. But in terms of applying it to solve, to now, I think that's the depth that it misses. And I'm sure in your introductory college essay writing, I don't know about you, but a lot of Kenyans struggle with that part.
I really struggled. And it's funny you mentioned that you brought back such interesting memories. I do remember my first piece that I wrote, actually, it wasn't even before college. I was still in high school. And it was for the school paper. And I was like, finally, here's my opportunity. And so I went ahead and mastered every skill I could remember. Of course, by this point, I was very rusty, but tried to remember all my proverbs, my synonyms, my similes, my complex wording and complex sentence construction, and all these connector words that we were taught, like no sooner than had one person done this, then the other person did the next thing. I used everything I could bring. And my journalism professor was like, no. This is too complicated. I don't understand what you're saying. And then that's when I realized, wow, education, and this is part of the problem, I suppose, right? That education and skills generation is very context specific. So in the context that 844 was designed, I think it was brilliant. But then the world moved faster. The world required a higher level of innovation. The world required people to be able to think on their feet. The jobs that the 844 system curriculum promised didn't necessarily materialize quick enough. And so you had so many people coming out of the system with book knowledge, but not enough opportunity to convert the book knowledge to actual practical skill. And then without that ability to convert what you know and to use it in the workplace, you don't get a chance to check yourself. You don't get a chance to know, oh, it's not good enough that I write, a 1,500 word essay if nobody understands what I'm saying, or if I do it and it's full of grammatical and typographical errors, or the thesis, like you rightly mentioned, is unclear and obtuse. So that's the other thing that I think, is missing when we're thinking about skills, because they're acquired skills from an education perspective, but then there's also what you acquire when you're working. And I think without clear opportunities for the youth to either pick up internships or to be mentored, or even just get experience. I think you and I experienced this where even your first entry-level job, somebody wants 5 or 6 years experience, and like, where are you going to get that, right? So without that experience piece, you're just left with a bunch of knowledge that you don't quite know how to make into a skill.
You've raised such a very good point, especially on the issue of work. And I think something has changed in our system. When I look at younger people who've just graduated from Kenyan universities and Kenyan colleges, I find that many of them have built skills. Many of them have part-time jobs. Many of them go through their 4 years of universities while holding down a part-time job. And I find them very innovative. I find them very innovative. And when I think about my time then, it was almost looked down upon to have a job while in university. There was that whole idea that if you get into some jobs, then you will not study and you will not graduate, and you'd be given a list of names of people who went and abandoned their education because
Yeah.
of getting into jobs. But actually, when you
Yeah.
think about it,
Yeah.
as you said, work has a way of bringing some of those skills to bear very, very deliberately.
Mm.
And I think if I could do things differently, I would
Mm.
definitely invest in more um, work time on campus. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it takes away from the academic experience,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of balance it out and just have real practical skills on campus as I pursue my liberal arts curriculum.
I like that. You know, I was trying to think about a framework, and maybe this is part of the critical reasoning skills that we weren't taught. And I always find, I always found my peers who can actually put together frameworks a bit more impressive. Maybe it's because it shows a way of thinking. But listening to you, I'm just thinking about if I was to try to come up with a framework and say, you know, for a skill to be successful, you need a confluence of instruction. So everything that you're learning from your school, from a mentor, from an internship, from, you know, some other person that you respect, like a friend or relative. So you need to be able to use, I mean, get all of these pieces of instructions together and implement them in either an internship or a work experience or your own business or as an apprentice, so that then you have a marketable skill. Because I tend to find that you'd either have people who are very good at implementing, so they know how things get done, but they don't know exactly what's underlying it. And so then maybe there ends up being a gap for critical reasoning, because you don't know, you can't go beyond. You can only see 1 + 1 is 2, but you can't, for the life in you would never think of raising 2 by the power of 2 and getting 4, right? You just know the answer is 4 when you see a 2 and a 2, but you don't know, you know, you could add 2 + 2, you could raise 2 by the power of 2, you could, you know, you're not able to see the other side of the equation. So I think, you know, there you do need a bit of the instruction. Or you could have people who are very strong on the instruction piece, that they, you know, they know exactly how we get to 4, but, you know, they'd rather, you know, calculate, what is it, the logarithm of 4 to the base of 2 and exponent that by 2 to get to 4, right? And all of them are right. It's just, you know, there's a simpler way. You can do 1 + 1. So you almost have this mishmash of people who are really intellectual and can't implement, or very steeped in implementation, but they won't think of a different way because they know it's done this way. So you have the status quo folks, and then you have the information bias led folks, right? The people who are they know exactly, they have the instruction with them, they have all this information at their at disposal, but they can't think of a different way to deliver it.
That's very powerful, and it's more of sort of like thinking from many angles and many perspectives to arrive at sort of like the same conclusion.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely the sign of understanding something in a very well-rounded way. I think, and you made references to an Ivy League education, and a lot of people, when they think about sort of America, people tend to talk about the great universities, which it's true they are there, but my experience and what I found super interesting during my time in the States is the ubiquitous community college, which is literally around every corner. You cannot go to any part of America and not get a small community college. And for me, I think this is really the unsung part of the US.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the US is such a big skills-based economy.
Yeah.
Because even if you worked on Wall Street and got laid off here, you could easily sign up into a community college,
Yeah.
learn a different skill, learn programming, and in about 3-4 months, start your own software development company. I think that's one of the great things the US has really been able to have. So you could always constantly reinvent yourself. And I think these small community colleges really help people retool and reskill and that. And I think if we can adapt something similar in Kenya, where you really have a place where you could really go change and almost grab a new career and be able to make, I think it's powerful. When I lived in Seattle, I remember people would say, I'd ask people, what are you doing for the weekend? And someone would tell you, oh, I'm doing my granite kitchen. And truth to their word, in about 2 weeks, they had completely redone their granite kitchen table.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'll be like, wow, did you learn this in university? And
Wow.
like, no. So I think part of the great do-it-yourself culture, which has generated in America, is really that whole idea of you can pick up skills and you can really reinvent yourself. And I think that part has not maybe sunk in many other countries.
Indeed, I'd say, and this is also a bit of a failing because there was an idea that if you strengthen the polytechnics, or what now we're calling TVETs, that could be a place for quick upskilling. But unfortunately, they were always shrouded in this view of, okay, if you don't pass your final year exam in high school, and you can't go to university or college, then yeah, go consider the TVET, right? So already they were framed as your next best thing, or not necessarily a place where you could go pick up a certificate course in nursing and skill your way up, right? So it was always sort of like, oh, you're not good enough, you can't do nursing, just go study a certificate. And so already the social norm wasn't that, hey, I'm actually going to go here and upskill myself and get to a diploma, get to a degree, get to a postgraduate degree, get to a doctorate. So we've not had that linear push, or the appeal has been, go to university, go do this, go do that. And if you end up in a polytechnic or a TVET, you almost considered a second-class citizen. But then there's also something, you talked about where it made me think of the IKEA effect, right? So if you actually build something from scratch, like that, the person who designed the countertop out of marble, he has a lot of pride and passion in doing that, right? So that's his baby, that's his thing. So it's a shame, and you see, for him, then he'd be very attached to this way of, hey, let me go and upskill because I can see something tangible. But I think the other problem that we've had is, it's not all been our education system's fault. I think part of the other problem is we've not kept up with the skills that are required for the current market. So I'll give you an example. I remember when I was in high school, I was really excited about the concept of electronic engineering. And actually, that was meant to be my career choice when I finished high school. Though in my final year, when actually my gap year, so final year was ready to go to college, I had a chance to talk to people who had done electronic engineering. And I was completely disappointed because I thought I would be learning how to, design circuits, how to come up with the next best innovation. And for someone to sit me down and tell me, slow your roll. The first 4 years, you will learn about electrical circuits, but not necessarily integrated circuits. You learn about how to wire the home, how to do this, how to do that. Your final at some point will be to climb a utility pole and hang a line, if you're lucky, under the main utility provider. And that just crushed me, right? Because I thought, oh my goodness, here was finally the time when I felt like I would catch up with the children in the Far East who, by the time they were 4, 5, 6 years old, were designing radios, building remote control cars, programming integrated circuits. And you're telling me that when I'm 15, 16, or 19, 20, 21, I'm going to be climbing a pole. So for our podcast listeners, I have a serious aversion to heights, right? Like I'm happy as long as I'm not above a height that's greater than my own height. Beyond that, let's just come off that high place. Bad things can happen, right? My body, my adrenal glands just, message danger and prepare enough adrenaline to help me flee. So I couldn't believe that in my quote unquote prime, when I'll be now finally accomplishing the career of my dreams, I wouldn't actually be doing what I think would help me be competitive. And then I would look around and see the people who had done the degree that I wanted to do. And to be honest, they were busy soldering circuits together, repairing radios and TVs, which wasn't bad. And at least that kept them going until there was another wave of diversification, industrialization, where now things were coming more or less good to go. There's no electronic chipboard that you're going to solder together a transistor and a capacitor. All these are integrated circuits, and once the circuit is done, you're done. So those folks ended up just losing out on a job because of technological advancements. So I also feel, Ken, that there's a piece around the fact that the skills that we imparted, we may not have necessarily kept ahead of the times. We're just trying to do catch up. But what we should have been doing is thinking about leapfrogging. So it's not so much that we know how to design a road and we're teaching people through civic engineering how to make roads. Teach them how to make the roads of the future that will use 10% less bitumen and will be more cost effective and require less maintenance. So I think that's the piece there. You talked about innovation, and I feel like that's the unsung piece. Like we're just doing catch up. Other countries are leapfrogging.
And you raised a very good example of your experience, insight into electrical engineering. And to be fair, our 844 curriculum, I remember we had topics such as woodwork,
right,
and metalwork. But as you were speaking, I was just wondering, why when sort of like the examinations not practical? If it's woodwork, why don't we get an exam of assembling something in wood or metal? It's always a written exam,
yes,
which sort of feel A, B, C, or D. And it made me wonder, have we prioritized exams above learning?
Yeah.
And are these sort of like the consequences of when a society sort of prioritizes examinations over learning? Just a profound point, and I know we don't have much time.
Yeah. No, really interesting. It reminds me of when, again, I was in high school doing electricity. So I still carried on my dream in high school into electricity. And one of the reasons why I actually ended up dropping that subject is because the final year practical, 60% of the exam, your final exam, was wiring a circuit. And don't get me wrong, I'd been wiring circuits from time immemorial, so that wasn't my issue. My issue was the way the exam was being administered. So every prong of this practical was designed to stress you to the max, right? So you had 1 hour to completely redesign an electronic circuit and wire up a home, and you couldn't go at your pace. You had to do one small piece, get the examiner to approve it. Do the next piece, get the examiner to approve it. So you were getting points for, did you splice the conductor correctly? Did you leave enough height between the tip of the conductor to the base and of the terminal and the conductor? Did you leave enough space? Did you insert it correctly? Did you nail it flat and flush against the board? And it just felt, and I respect all my colleagues who did that, because the 1.5 hours that you'd have for that exam literally dissolved into like 45 minutes, because you're 20 people, each of you has to get approval. If it's not good, you're told, go start again. So even where there was a bit of a practical component, I worried slightly that we overinvested in the wrong area, right? Like what we really should have been focusing on is the result. Has that electrical circuit worked? Has it been done in the most innovative way? Did you use less conductors than you needed to? So I think it all comes back to the market readiness. Are this youth being market ready? And I think that's where the focus needs to be, even as we wind, is thinking around how do you get the youth to prepare for not only the jobs that are here today, but ready for the jobs that will come in the future.
It's a very good place to end the discussion. I think my parting shot is, I think this is a having the World Youth Skills Day on the calendar, I think it's a great opportunity for people to exchange research, exchange ideas. It sort of brings a confluence of many ideas, and I hope by the time maybe we are discussing this next year, we'd have seen sort of like some developments, not just Kenya but also regionally, in how people are thinking about this.
Excellent. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's been our time, everyone. Thank you so very much for listening. Please send us your thoughts, comments, suggestions on what we just discussed today, or if you'd like to have new topics covered for the next episode. And for me, wishing you all the best. Stay safe, keep well. Ken, take us away.
Have a good weekend. Keep well, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And feel free, as always, to share with us some of your feedbacks. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.